The cabin of Altura Air's first-class section was hushed, dressed in the soft hum of jet engines and the muffled rustle of luxury. Cream leather seats stretched out like lounge chairs in the sky, and the air smelled of lavender and pressed linen. Keanu Reeves had just settled into seat 2A, his travel bag tucked neatly, a worn paperback in his hand, and sunglasses pushed up onto his head. Dressed in a plain black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, he looked nothing like the man whose face appeared on red carpets and magazine covers. That was the point. This wasn't a premiere. This was a cross-country flight from JFK to San Francisco, and Keanu had chosen this airline, Altura Air, for one specific reason. They were about to sign a $70 million zero-cents contract with his AI tech firm, a partnership built on respect, innovation, and their so-called commitment to excellence. But as he leaned back, ready to close his eyes for a quiet flight, he sensed something wasn't right. It was subtle at first. The double glances, the tight smiles from the flight attendants, the hesitation in their greetings. Keanu had flown hundreds of times, had gotten used to the curious stares, the fan whispers. But this was different. This wasn't recognition. This was discomfort. From them. The moment arrived like a cold slap. "Excuse me, sir," said a woman standing beside him. Her name badge read Lauren Heller. She was immaculately put together, blonde bun, razor-sharp uniform, and a voice wrapped in polished professionalism. But her eyes told a different story. "I'm afraid you'll need to move," she said, her tone polite but laced with something unspoken. Keanu looked up slowly, blinking away the fatigue. "I'm sorry. This seat is usually reserved for one of our longtime patrons, Mrs. Claudia Harwick. She requested it for today's flight. There seems to have been a mistake during booking." Keanu glanced at his boarding pass again, already knowing what it said. 2A First Class. "I believe this is my seat," he replied calmly, his voice even, never sharp. Lauren's smile tightened. "Yes, sir, but Mrs. Harwick always sits here. We'd be happy to reseat you elsewhere in the cabin." "I'm comfortable where I am," Keanu replied, not moving. "I paid for this seat." It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them. The way her eyes flicked to the other passengers watching. The way she emphasized someone like you. Like he didn't belong here. Not in first class. Not on this flight. Not among people like Claudia Harwick. A moment later, another figure approached. Blake Jordan, cabin supervisor, broad-shouldered and stiff-faced. "Is there a problem here?" he asked Lauren, ignoring Keanu entirely. Lauren nodded subtly. "He's refusing to move." Blake turned to Keanu for the first time, eyes narrow. "Sir, I need you to cooperate. Mrs. Harwick has specifically requested this seat. We can find another arrangement." Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. "This is my seat," he said simply, holding up the boarding pass again. "We're not asking again," Blake said, the tone shifting from courteous to commanding. At that moment, the aisle stirred. Claudia Harwick herself appeared, a woman in her mid-60s, wearing a beige designer coat and pearl earrings that nearly glowed under the cabin lights. She didn't look at Keanu. She looked through him. "That's my seat," she said, not as a statement, but as an expectation. Keanu looked at her, then back to Blake. "You've made a mistake," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. "But I'm not moving. Not because I can't, but because I shouldn't have to." The silence that followed was heavy. A passenger 2 rows back raised a phone, subtle but visible. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat. No one spoke. "Sir," Blake repeated, now more forceful. "If you don't comply, we'll have to call security. We don't want a disturbance." Keanu stared at him, for a long beat. Then, without a word, he stood. Not in defeat, not in anger, but with the calm of someone who had seen this pattern before and had long since stopped being surprised. He picked up his bag, looked at the crew, then at Claudia Harwick. "You just made a very expensive mistake," he said quietly, his eyes meeting Lauren's for the first and last time. No one clapped. No one protested. The rest of the cabin looked away, as if pretending it didn't happen made it easier to stomach. As Keanu stepped off the plane, escorted by 2 silent security guards, he didn't look back. But the fire had already started. He just hadn't poured the fuel on it yet. And the airline? Altura Air had no idea who they had just removed from seat 2A, but they were about to find out. If this kind of injustice makes your blood boil, imagine what happens when the wrong man has the power to shut down the system. Stay with us. They thought he was just another entitled passenger making a scene, until the emails started flooding their press inbox and Altura Air's executive office realized who had just walked off their plane. Keanu Reeves wasn't just a celebrity. He wasn't even just a businessman. He was the quiet storm they never saw coming. As the aircraft took off without him, Keanu sat in the minimalist silence of the private lounge back at JFK, his bag resting beside him, the cup of black coffee in front of him untouched. Outside the tinted windows, jets taxied under a fading orange sky, but Keanu's mind wasn't in New York anymore. It was 5 steps ahead, already assembling the pieces of what came next. He had left the flight without fanfare, without a headline, but not without a plan. Moments later, Grace Linwood walked in, his longtime COO and one of the sharpest strategists in Silicon Valley. Dressed in a charcoal pantsuit, tablet in hand, her eyes flicked to Keanu before she spoke. "We've got a situation." Keanu simply nodded, as if he already knew. "Go ahead." She sat down across from him. "Footage is out. Someone recorded the exchange. A 3-minute video showing you calmly refusing to leave your assigned seat, then being escorted off. The comments are already blowing up, and the press is starting to catch wind of it." He didn't react, just exhaled slowly. "Let it grow." Grace tilted her head. "You sure?" "Yes," he said. "Let the truth walk around a little before they start trying to run damage control." It was hard to explain to anyone who hadn't walked through it what had just happened on that plane. It wasn't about the seat. It was never about the seat. It was about what that seat represented and who people assumed deserved to sit there. Keanu had spent decades walking a tightrope between worlds, Hollywood and business, fame and anonymity. But in that moment on Flight 723, none of it had mattered. They didn't see him as a global figure, a founder, or even a paying passenger. They saw someone who didn't fit their image of who belonged in first class. Grace slid the tablet across the table. "You want to see what the world's saying?" He looked briefly. The hashtags were already trending. Altura discrimination, Seat 2A, justice for Keanu, dozens of comments beneath the video. "I don't care how famous he is. This happens to people who aren't famous every day." Keanu handled that with more grace than I ever could. "That crew better get ready. He doesn't need to yell. He just needs to move." Truth. Across the screen, one thumbnail stood out. An article titled, "Altura Air Kicks Off Hollywood Icon from First Class. Mistake or Misconduct?" Keanu leaned back. "It's bigger than me now," Grace agreed. "And you want to keep it that way? Good, because we've got more cards to play." She tapped the screen again, switching to another set of files. "Legal's already reviewing the terms of our pending contract with Altura. $69 million for implementing bias detection algorithms across their customer service AI. You know, the deal we were finalizing this week?" Keanu raised an eyebrow. They just kicked their AI partner off a flight for looking? What? Too ordinary? Grace smiled, but it was tight, too unassuming, too human. At that moment, Angela Moore, Keanu's longtime legal counsel, joined them, phone still in hand, heels clicking across the polished floor. "I just got off a call with our external firm," she said, sliding into the third seat. "We have full grounds for breach of contract, reputational damage, and, most importantly, discriminatory conduct based on profile and appearance. And we're not just talking PR nightmares, we're talking federal violations." Keanu rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I don't want this to be about lawsuits." Angela smirked. "Too late. They made it about that the second they decided you were expendable." He looked up, steady. "We go forward, but we don't just file. We make this a lesson for them. For every company watching." Angela nodded, already drafting the strategy. Grace leaned in. "You want to go public?" Keanu shook his head. "Not yet. Let the story breathe. People are already talking. That's the first wave. We wait for the second one. When Altura tries to spin it." "And then?" Grace asked. He met her eyes. "Then we give them the truth. With interest. For most people, getting kicked off a plane would be the story. For Keanu, it was the prelude. The real story had roots stretching months back, long before the gate agent's fake smile or the insult disguised as customer service. Keanu's company, Harmonic Systems, had been developing predictive AI models for equitable service delivery in everything from hospitals to airlines. Altura Air had been first in line to implement it. In fact, they had approached him. The irony burned. Keanu's phone buzzed. A message from a journalist he trusted. Heard what happened. Off the record, do they know who they just tossed off that plane? He didn't reply. Instead, he turned to Grace. "Get a statement ready. Short, factual, and firm. No outrage, just clarity." Angela interrupted. "I'll coordinate with the media team, but just so you know, Claudia Harwick's legal team already released a statement claiming you aggressively refused crew orders." Keanu snorted. "Of course they did." Grace checked her watch. "We've got about 2 hours before the morning cycles pick it up. Then it's viral." Angela stood. "In the meantime, I'd like to request access to Altura's passenger relocation history. We've had reports of other similar incidents. If this is systemic..." "It is," Keanu cut in. They both looked at him. "I've seen the data," he said. "They don't call it discrimination, but they code it in." The table fell silent. Grace finally whispered, "You really want to expose the whole thing?" "No," Keanu said, picking up his coffee at last. "I want to fix it. But if exposing it is the only way to fix it, then yes, that's exactly what I want." He stood and gathered his things. The press hadn't called yet, but they would. And when they did, he wouldn't yell. He wouldn't tweet. He wouldn't post a selfie from a different airline. He'd do what he'd always done when faced with a fight he didn't ask for, but couldn't walk away from. He'd walk straight into it. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about something that couldn't be denied anymore. And while Altura Air scrambled to contain a PR firestorm, they hadn't yet realized what kind of storm they were really facing. Because the quiet man they pushed off that plane, he was about to take flight in a way they never expected. They thought they were dealing with a man who'd just quietly vanish into the terminal. But what they didn't realize was that Keanu Reeves wasn't just walking away from an airline seat. He was walking towards something bigger. And by the time Altura Air figured that out, the world had already started watching. The next morning, the situation was already spiraling out of Altura's control. Grace Linwood was up before dawn, reviewing headlines that hadn't even hit newsstands yet. Her tablet screen lit up with alerts from all directions. Twitter threads from business leaders, Reddit discussions dissecting the footage, morning talk shows teasing a Hollywood scandal that's not what it seems. By 6 a.m., 3 national anchors had already said his name, and not one of them mentioned a movie. At 6:47 a.m., Keanu's face appeared on every major network, not walking a red carpet or holding a film award, but being escorted calmly, stoically, off a plane by security guards. The accompanying audio was quiet but crystal clear. "This is my assigned seat. I paid for it." "We're asking you to move, sir. You're making a mistake." The silence afterward was louder than any shouting match. On social media, the reaction was immediate and furious. Auteur Air just kicked off the one man who'd never raise his voice, but always raises the bar. Unreal. If Keanu can be treated like this, what chance does the rest of us have? Now imagine how often this happens to folks who aren't rich or famous. Think about that. And just like that, it wasn't just Keanu's story anymore. By the time Keanu arrived at Harmonic Systems Manhattan headquarters, the video had already surpassed 4 million views. Inside the sleek, glass-wrapped building, his legal and PR teams had taken over the entire executive wing. Angela Moore stood at the whiteboard, mapping legal strategy, while Grace paced back and forth in front of a half-dozen monitors, showing news segments, social media trends, and Altura's real-time stock price, which was dropping by the minute. "They're scrambling," Grace said as Keanu entered the room. Their official account tried to post a statement about "committed to fairness for all passengers." It backfired, ratioed in under 10 minutes. "They're getting torched," Angela added. "We've also been contacted by 3 former passengers who claim similar treatment. Different flights, same patterns. Mismatched bookings, priority seat revocations, seat reassignments that just so happen to target people of color or younger men traveling solo." Keanu didn't blink. "Get them on record." Angela nodded. "Already happening?" "Good," he said. "Let's turn the anecdote into evidence." He walked to the largest screen, which now showed a split view, one side running Altura's internal statement leak, an email titled "Containment Strategy, Flight 723 Incident," and the other side displaying the trending tag, "Seat 2A. "They're trying to pin this on procedural confusion," Grace said, "blaming the ground staff and a miscommunication in their seating system. Classic deflect and diffuse." Keanu studied the screen for a long moment. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with a tone that made the whole room pause. "Release the footage we have. Uncut. No edits." Angela hesitated. "You sure?" "Yes. No commentary. No caption. Just the truth. Let the public decide what they're seeing." An hour later, Harmonic's official account posted the full cabin footage, synced with time-stamped logs of Keanu's booking and audio transcripts of the exchange. No dramatic music, no finger-pointing, just calm defiance and uncomfortable reality. It went viral in 15 minutes. By noon, major civil rights organizations had issued statements supporting Keanu. Several called for federal investigation into Altura's treatment of passengers, especially their seat reassignment policies. Prominent figures from entertainment and business weighed in publicly, praising Keanu for not reacting with outrage, but with restraint and purpose. But what hit hardest was an interview aired that evening with a young black entrepreneur from Detroit named Jamal, who recounted an eerily similar story from 2 months prior. First-class ticket, removed without explanation, no refund, no apology. "I thought I was crazy," Jamal said, holding back frustration. "Now I realize they just thought I didn't belong there." Angela turned to Keanu after watching the clip. "This is the part you can't manufacture. People aren't just seeing your story. They're remembering their own." Keanu nodded. "That's the point." Back at Altura's corporate headquarters, the executive floor had gone into full lockdown. CEO Gordon Pratt stood at the head of a long boardroom table, sleeves rolled up, tie hanging loose, and his face pale from sleep deprivation and panic. His legal team sat silent as his communications director read off a list of major outlets preparing to run exposés, none of which looked favorable. "We need to contain this," Gordon snapped. "Too late," the comms director replied. "You removed the man your company was about to sign a $70 million 0 cents deal with. You didn't just insult a customer, you insulted your own partner." Gordon buried his face in his hands. "Has anyone even tried to reach out to him?" "His team hasn't responded to a single request, not one." "Of course not," Gordon muttered. "He doesn't have to, he just has to sit still and watch us burn." Meanwhile, Grace had pulled together the next media briefing. Standing before a forest of microphones in a calm, gray-toned room, she delivered a short, precise statement on behalf of Harmonic Systems. "Mr. Reeves has no interest in public vendettas. However, when a systemic failure exposes not just a flaw in a company, but in an industry, silence becomes complicity. We will not be silent. We will pursue the truth through legal, ethical, and public means. We encourage Altura Air to join us in seeking accountability, not for optics, but for justice." That statement made the front page of every major outlet the next morning. But the most unexpected moment came later that evening when Keanu himself made a rare appearance. Just a 2-minute live stream. Dressed simply, seated at a table with soft lighting behind him, he spoke directly to the camera. "I didn't expect to be the story," he said. "I didn't want to be. I paid for a seat and was told I didn't belong. But I've lived long enough to know it's never just about the seat. It's about who people assume should be sitting in it." He paused. "If this story has found you, and it reminds you of something you've experienced or seen or felt, don't stay silent. Because you're not alone, and silence is where systems like this survive." He ended the stream without fanfare, and the internet erupted again. The reaction was immediate and global. Messages from passengers all over the world flooded Harmonic's inbox, offers of support, personal stories, corporate interest in the AI system Altura had once wanted. Even airline competitors reached out discreetly, asking about licensing options. And Altura? Their phones rang off the hook with cancellations. Their PR firm resigned. And shareholders began demanding a vote of confidence in Gordon Pratt's leadership. But Keanu wasn't watching that closely. He was already preparing for the next step, because this story wasn't just about exposure, it was about consequence. They took a seat from the wrong man. Now he's coming for the entire structure that allowed it. The moment Keanu's live stream ended, the tone shifted. What had been a story of public outrage transformed into something colder, heavier, consequence. While the internet continued to flood with support and testimonials, behind closed doors, the machinery of justice began to turn. And Keanu Reeves? He didn't wait for apologies. Angela Moore had never seen the legal team move so fast. Within 12 hours of the broadcast, she and her associates had drafted the opening complaint, 67 pages outlining discriminatory practices, breach of contract, reputational damage, and willful misconduct. Every claim was backed with video, digital receipts, Altura's own communications, and witness testimonies. She didn't write it with vengeance in mind. She wrote it for precision. Keanu hadn't asked her to punish anyone. He'd asked her to make sure it never happened again. At 9:03 IEM, Harmonic Systems filed a federal lawsuit against Altura Air in the Southern District of New York. At 9:16 IEM, the filing leaked to the press. By 9:20, it was front-page news. The document didn't just name the airline, it named individuals. Lauren Heller, the flight attendant, Blake Jordan, the cabin supervisor, CEO Gordon Pratt, and perhaps most damning, it included an internal email chain, recently obtained by whistleblowers, where Claudia Harwick had emailed Altura's VIP service director weeks earlier to reserve her usual seat in first, even if it means bumping someone. That line wasn't just entitled, it was actionable. Grace Linwood paced inside the Manhattan command room they'd turned into a crisis war room. Digital maps tracked public sentiment by region. One screen displayed stock market fluctuations. Another rotated trending clips. Grace's eyes stayed on the numbers. "Stock's down another 6% since open," she muttered, flipping through data. "Investors are starting to pull out." Angela entered the room, calm as ever. "Complaint has traction. The federal court's already assigned a judge. Altura's general counsel just requested mediation." Keanu didn't even look up from his notebook. "We're not mediating. Not yet," Grace agreed. "They think we want money. They still don't understand." "They will," Angela replied. "Especially when discovery begins. We've already collected over a dozen passenger stories, and now, thanks to the viral wave, employees inside Altura are starting to reach out. Anonymously, for now." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Whistleblowers?" Angela nodded. "Multiple. We've got messages alleging systemic reassignments, pressuring crew to prioritize legacy clients, and even unofficial training notes that instruct new flight staff to use discretion in seating aesthetics." Keanu closed his notebook. Aesthetics. That's the word they used. He stood, walked to the window, hands in his pockets. They built bias into their service model. They just dressed it up in polite language. Angela added, "And they've been doing it for years. We just gave it a face." As the lawsuit gained momentum, Altura's internal walls began to crumble. CEO Gordon Pratt was no longer storming into boardrooms with confidence. He was being escorted into closed-door meetings with lawyers and angry investors. The board, once loyal, was fracturing. The legal team urged caution. The PR team had gone radio silent, and the HR director had just resigned. It was a slow-motion collapse, and every piece falling made a louder sound. Meanwhile, Keanu wasn't celebrating. He was organizing. Grace spent the next 48 hours coordinating with outside civil rights groups, inviting them to help audit Altura's public policies. Angela met with government oversight officials. They weren't interested in symbolism. They wanted reform. "We're not letting this be a story that fades," Keanu told his team. "We're making it a standard." By now, media outlets were doing deeper dives, not just on the incident, but on Altura's history. A 2019 passenger complaint surfaced involving a single mother who had also been moved from her seat in favor of a VIP frequent flyer. An internal review had cleared the airline of wrongdoing back then, citing scheduling confusion. Sounded familiar now. But Grace reviewed a binder of data. "We've got a case not just for discrimination, but for pattern behavior and cover-ups." Angela was already ahead. "We're building a parallel claim for systemic negligence. It'll force them into compliance, either that or into bankruptcy." Then came the turning point. An anonymous Altura staffer leaked an internal training video to the press. In it, a manager advised flight attendants to gently de-escalate difficult passengers, especially if they look like they don't fit the first-class profile. The clip was grainy. The words were clear. It aired during prime time. That night, Altura's board of directors held an emergency vote. The next morning, Gordon Pratt was removed as CEO. Lauren Heller and Blake Jordan were both fired, effective immediately. Claudia Harwick's VIP status was revoked, her attorney issuing a public statement about her misunderstanding of the situation. But Keanu didn't post a word. No gloating, no quotes. Instead, he released a one-line statement through Grace. "Justice doesn't begin with punishment. It begins with change. Yet even with the terminations and apology statements, Keanu knew better. Firing a few people didn't change a system. It just gave the illusion of progress. Angela returned to him later that day, a file in hand. "We've drafted a proposed agreement. Non-negotiable. Includes mandatory anti-bias training, public publication of Altura's complaint metrics, and, most importantly, implementation of our AI service equity model across their entire network. Full transparency, full accountability." "And if they don't sign?" Grace asked. Angela didn't blink. "Then we take them to court, and this becomes a case study in failure." Keanu considered the paper. His thumb ran along the edge. "Send it to them." With a clock. Back at Altura headquarters, panic set in. With Gordon gone, the interim CEO, a previously unseen board member named Judith Mays, had stepped in. Her first order of business was triage. She read the proposal aloud to the board. "No negotiation?" one director asked. "No," Judith replied. "And frankly, I don't blame them," another asked. "But if we comply, we're essentially admitting to years of discriminatory practices." Judith stared him down. "You think the public hasn't already figured that out?" The board fell quiet. Judith continued. "We either become the company that changed or the company that collapsed trying to cover its tracks. Choose." Meanwhile, Keanu waited, calm, measured, unshaken. Because this was never about revenge. It was about setting the bar higher and daring others to meet it. Altura had one last chance to rise from the ashes, but Keanu was ready either way. The next meeting wouldn't be about apologies. It would be about power. Altura's boardroom had gone silent after Judith Mays dropped the ultimatum. For decades, they had operated behind layers of prestige, policy, and plausible deniability. But now, with the world watching and Keanu Reeves holding the matchbook, they had no more shadows to hide in. And while Judith urged them to accept the terms, in Manhattan, Keanu and his team were already preparing for what would come next, whether the airline cooperated or not. The proposal had been clear: public transparency reports, full implementation of Harmonic's AI bias detection system, mandatory diversity and de-escalation training, a permanent oversight board with independent enforcement authority, and a public apology. Not a scripted one, a real one. The kind that came with consequences and corrections. Judith Mays signed the agreement that evening, but instead of emailing a digital copy with a press embargo, she made a phone call. "Mr. Reeves," she said as Keanu answered from his office at Harmonic headquarters. "I'd like to meet in person." Keanu paused for only a moment. "Tomorrow, 11 a.m., your office." She hesitated. "You don't want to meet on neutral ground?" "This isn't a negotiation, Miss Mays. It's a reckoning." The next morning, Altura's marble-floored lobby was eerily quiet as Keanu walked through the entrance flanked by Grace and Angela. There were no reporters, no flashing lights, just employees pretending not to look and executives who couldn't meet his eyes. The hallway to the executive suite felt like a gallery of old portraits and newer regret. Inside the boardroom, Judith stood as he entered. She didn't offer her hand. Neither did he, but she nodded once, deeply, as if to say, "Let's begin." Angela handed her the updated proposal. "We've incorporated the public data disclosure requirement into a quarterly timeline. We expect the first report within 90 days. Judith didn't argue. "Done." Grace spoke next. "The independent board will need veto authority. Oversight without enforcement is theater." Judith nodded again. "Agreed." I'll work with outside counsel to finalize the framework. We'll provide budget and access." Then came Keanu's turn. He stood at the head of the table, resting both hands on the polished wood, eyes steady. "I'm not here to punish your company," he said. "That's already happening without me lifting a finger. I'm here to make sure no one else walks onto one of your flights and leaves feeling erased. I'm here to make sure the industry doesn't confuse performance with progress. If we're going to fix this, it can't stop with Alcura." Judith swallowed. "We understand." "Do you?" Keanu asked. "Because PR campaigns won't fix what's broken. What you signed yesterday is not a solution. It's a foundation. The work starts now." Grace leaned in, sliding a secondary agreement across the table. "We're also going to help you, not as vendors, as auditors. Our team will integrate Harmonic's AI into your live systems. It'll flag inconsistencies in passenger treatment, tone, body language biases, and escalation patterns. And those reports won't just go to your internal teams. They'll go to the oversight board, and if needed, publicly." Judith reviewed the document and, to her credit, didn't flinch. "We'll sign." Angela raised a final point. "There's also the matter of reparations. We want Altura to establish a passenger redress fund. For every proven case of discriminatory treatment in the past 5 years, you will offer formal acknowledgement and reimbursement, flights, fees, even emotional distress." Judith was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, we'll do it." The contract was signed, and for the first time in decades, an airline admitted fault, committed to structural change, and empowered a third-party system to monitor and report its own behavior. The press conference followed 2 hours later. Judith stood behind a sleek podium inside Altura's press suite, a wall of cameras and reporters in front of her. She read her statement carefully, this time without spin. "We failed, not once but many times. And in failing, we hurt the people we were supposed to serve. We can't undo that, but we can ensure it never happens again." She turned slightly to her left. Keanu stood quietly beside her. No notes, no mic, no flashy gesture, just presence. She continued, "Effective immediately. Altura Air will implement the most comprehensive anti-bias accountability system in commercial aviation, in partnership with Harmonic Systems. We're not doing this because we were forced. We're doing this because we were wrong." The cameras clicked. The internet exploded. News anchors called it the Altura reversal. Civil rights groups called it the beginning of industry self-policing. But what stuck most was a single phrase from Keanu, spoken later that evening in an interview with PB. "It's not about burning down the system. It's about making sure the door stays open for everyone, not just the ones who were already inside." Within 48 hours, 2 other airlines announced plans to review their customer service escalation policies. Within a week, 6 others quietly reached out to Harmonic for consultations. The FAA released a memo announcing it would be exploring systemic bias concerns during audits. Change had always been slow in the airline industry, until it wasn't. And while Altura's CEO took a bow, Keanu took a back seat. He didn't take a victory lap. He took a breath. Back at Harmonic, Grace watched new request notifications flood in. "We've got a dozen media appearances waiting, everyone from Anderson Cooper to the Today Show." Keanu shook his head. "Not now. This isn't about me. This is about what comes next." Angela stepped in, phone in hand. "You should see this. 3 former flight attendants just went public with video testimonies. They say they were trained to profile passengers, just like our data showed. It's hitting TikTok, Instagram, everywhere." Keanu listened, but his expression didn't change. "Then, let's keep the pressure where it belongs," he said. He walked to the window. Down below, the city moved on. Planes taking off, taxis honking, people pushing through their lives, unaware they were living inside a moment that might reshape the very rules they flew under. Because Altura had changed. But what about everyone else? Keanu had built the blueprint, but could the rest of the industry follow, and what would happen if they didn't? The final test was coming. Altura had signed the documents, issued the apology, and fired the right people. But in Keanu's mind, the real work had just begun. The press conference made headlines, sure. Investors breathed a temporary sigh of relief. But what mattered to him wasn't how well Altura bounced back. It was whether they, and the industry, would stay changed when no one was looking. A week after the contract was signed, Harmonic's AI systems were already integrated into Altura's call centers and flight management software. The pilot version flagged dozens of discrepancies within the first 72 hours. Minor infractions that hinted at much deeper patterns. A male passenger being offered compensation for a delay, while a female passenger was ignored. A request from a frequent flyer rerouted through IPO protocol, while a first-time traveler with the same issue was dismissed. It wasn't always loud. That was the danger. The bias had become part of the routine. Keanu sat at his office desk late that night, scrolling through the early audit reports. They confirmed what he already knew. Altura hadn't been uniquely bad. They'd just been exposed first. Across the country, ripples were forming. An airline in Texas quietly announced it was reevaluating its internal reporting systems. A regional carrier based out of Atlanta posted a statement about prioritizing equity in service delivery. Even a European airline requested a closed-door meeting with Harmonic's team to discuss licensing the bias detection tools. This wasn't a story anymore. It was a model. Still, Keanu refused to take credit. Change only sticks when it outgrows the person who started it, he told Grace one morning as they reviewed outreach requests from nonprofit organizations. She looked up from her screen. "You've got a meeting with the Department of Transportation tomorrow. They want to talk about adapting Harmonic's model into federal regulation." He nodded once. "Good. That's where this needs to go." Angela entered with a report in hand. "We've tallied the total from Altura's redress fund. Over 4,000 passengers have submitted claims. Most of them aren't even asking for money. They just want acknowledgement." Keanu stared at the paper, and they deserve it. The most unexpected moment came 3 days later. A woman in her late 70s named Lorraine Simmons wrote an open letter to the New York Times, recounting her own experience flying with Altura 20 years ago. She was told her seat had been overbooked and was quietly moved to the back of the plane while a younger white couple was escorted to her assigned row. She never said anything. Until now. Watching Mr. Reeves stand up so calmly reminded me of how small I felt that day. It stayed with me longer than I realized. Thank you for giving voice to people like me, who never thought anyone would listen. Keanu read it twice, then once more. He didn't reply to the letter, but he carried its weight with him. He'd entered the fight because of what happened to him, but now he was staying in it because of what had happened to everyone else. One morning, Grace walked into his office, holding up her phone. "You've been named in a Senate subcommittee report. They're calling your model the first scalable private sector blueprint for bias detection in transportation." Keanu barely reacted. "Are they implementing it?" "They're drafting it now." "Then it's working." Later that afternoon, he stepped into a conference hall for an event hosted by aviation leaders. Cameras clicked as he entered. Executives who once rolled their eyes at the idea of ethical algorithms now stood waiting to shake his hand. But he didn't go there to accept applause. He went to ask a question. Standing at the podium, he looked out across the crowd. CEOs, directors, regulators, and pilots. Every one of you has a choice, he said. You can keep pretending bias doesn't exist in your operations, or you can confront it, fix it, and lead differently. This isn't about being politically correct. It's about being professionally responsible. He paused. Altura didn't collapse because of a scandal. They nearly collapsed because they ignored a pattern. You won't survive the next wave if you do the same. He stepped away from the mic without waiting for a standing ovation. That night, sitting alone by the window of his office, Keanu looked down at the streetlights and moving cars, thinking not about what he'd accomplished, but what still remained. Somewhere out there, someone was boarding a plane for the first time. Someone was still being overlooked, still being doubted, still being quietly pushed aside. And thanks to what started in seat 2A, that world finally had less room for silence. If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter what they look like or where they sit, share this story. And if you want to see more true stories where justice finds its voice, subscribe to our channel, because change only happens when we make sure it's seen and never forgotten.